I'm going to tell you something you already know. The drug prices are too damn high, and our next guest is trying to do something about it. He belongs to a group called Vocal New York. That's VOCAL-NY, Voices of Community Activists and Leaders. It's a statewide grassroots organization, builds power among low-income people, including people affected by HIV and AIDS, Hep C, the drug war, homelessness, and other issues. And Clifton Garmon is the chief of staff there. Excuse me for having to look down for a second. And he's been with the organization for a number of years. He's an activist by background. And last week, Clifton and Vocal New York participated in a day of action to lower drug prices. I wanted to talk about that and whatever else comes up. So first of all, Clifton Garmon, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. And did I get anything wrong in all of that in the introduction?
No, you introduced me way better than I'd ever introduced myself. So,
Well, that's what friends are for. And okay, and you're a new friend. So welcome. So you guys had a day of action last week to lower drug prices or for lower drug prices. What was that all about?
yeah, so we here in New York State, and pretty much anybody anywhere in the state or in the world, has an interest in making sure that drug prices are affordable. And are not affordable for some, but affordable for all. And so one of the action that we did outside of Trump Hotel and Tower is to bring attention to a few things. One, the NAFTA 2.0 trade agreement that Trump has underway, and then also to talk about drug pricing in general, and the way that pharmaceutical corporations prioritize profit over people, over healthcare, honestly, over innovation, regardless of the claims that you may hear them make. The number one goal has always been profit. And so we were protesting to draw attention to that issue as a national day of action, because other places were doing that as well, other states. And so we did it outside of Trump Towers because of, one, the NAFTA 2.0 deal, but in particular because Trump has really taken on pharmaceutical drug pricing as an issue of concern of his, or at least that's what he claims, and says, goes as far as to say things like he would export or import drugs from Canada if he has to keep prices low. But this NAFTA 2.0 deal, for example, would actually cement high prices, would cement, would pretty much give away to pharma patents and guarantees that they can maintain inhumane pricing over years, 10 years or more. And that including here, Canada, and in Mexico. So that deal would actually export our really problematic policies, our failed attempt at drug pricing to other countries. And so that would pretty much X out any opportunity for people who are trying to buy drugs in other countries at a cheaper rate. And it also contradicts his very own argument that he could get cheaper drugs elsewhere.
So, okay, and I want to talk about NAFTA 2.0, but before we do that, before we get off the subject of Trump as Trump, yes, he says all the right things about wanting to lower drug prices, but what did he go and do? He went and nominated a big pharma drug executive belonging to they're all bad actors, but one of the major bad actors, running one of the major bad actors in the drug company world, appointed him to be a Secretary of Health and Human Services, didn't he? I'm speaking of Alex Azar.
Yeah, and the unfortunate thing about that is that, I mean, this isn't a surprising behavior. We've seen this from Trump from the very day he stepped foot in that office. He has made recommendations. He has made appointments that were never in the benefit of the people that he's supposed to be representing, whether they voted for him or not, but regardless, representing. And they have always been to the benefit of people who are making money, or people, yeah, who see potential in rigging our political system for financial gain. And Trump himself is a corporation. The name itself is a corporation. So the idea that we could ever put faith into an individual that would prioritize us over corporations is foolish. When the individual himself is a corporation, it represents corporations, and then fills his cabinet and advisors with other people whose goal is to make money, um, and
And
not.
so, right. I couldn't agree with you more. And now we've got, so that's why I bring up naming a big pharma executive to be in charge of the American healthcare system, as it were. Now let's talk about, since you chose Trump Towers partially because of NAFTA 2.0, you already talked a little bit about it, but here you have the president out of one side of his mouth saying, oh yeah, drugs cost too much here, I'm going to go up and I'm going to encourage people to go up to Canada, or I'll import them from Canada if I need to, which is something, Bernie Sanders has actually led those caravans up to Canada and so on. But at the same time, he's pushing this NAFTA 2.0 that would force Canadians to pay our outrageous drug prices rather than giving us a break and letting us get affordable drugs for once. Tell us how that works.
Yeah, and I mean, it does that. It does make drugs. Well, it pretty much guarantees the patent that many of these drugs already have, and which patents are, they're federally granted, right? So this is something that the people, if the federal government is representing us, has given you for exclusivity. It's not necessarily something people would probably normally agree with if they really knew how the system worked. Um, but the reality is that this goes a step further, and not only is it going to guarantee those prices at that rate, it's also going to make it complicated for example, biologic patents, for example. So these drugs around vaccines, drugs that help to cure cancer, and all of these hostage at this price. Imagine going to a grocery store and being told you can only buy all of the name brand products. You have no options whatsoever because our government has given exclusivity to the manufacturers of all of the name brands in that store. Whether you're buying clothes, whether you're buying food, or what other kind of product. And so it's no different for medicine, except medicine is extremely expensive and we could die without it, especially if we're talking about biological medicines like cancer treatments and vaccines. And so it is.
And you know what makes it even worse, Clifton? I just have to jump in here. And again, we're talking with Clifton Garmon of Vocal New York. What makes it even worse is that a lot of times we've granted them these exclusive patents. And by we, I mean the United States government has granted exclusive patents to medications that was invented at the expense of the United States government. So it's like we the people create something that can save lives, then we give it to somebody who didn't create it and say, you have exclusive right to this, and you can charge our own people more than they can afford to get it, even though we developed it as a country, and if they can't afford it, they die.
That's absolutely right. And no drug has ever been developed solely by a pharmaceutical corporation because our system has somehow fed that drug. For example, the universities that are publicly funded probably developed, more than likely, not just probably, but more than likely developed the innovation around that drug, that researched it, that did all the work behind it. Years and years of education, years of publicly funded education has gone into that. And then on top of that, on top of the brilliant people behind developing these things, but then that innovation is purchased from under us and then sold to us tenfold, if not more. We give them that exclusivity, and we actually interrupt the very economic structure that so many politicians put their weight behind. And so we say, oh, we need a strong economy. We depend on capitalism to feed this economy. But then we interrupt the very idea that they claim is the best strategy to a healthy economy. And by creating exclusivity, by actually regulating a market, except not in the way that ensures healthcare and human lives, but in a way that ensures profit for one industry. Pharmaceutical corporations have the highest profit margins of any other industry in the nation, in the world. And the threat, if we as a nation negotiated those prices, which I'd like to get into eventually, but to negotiate the prices down, or even take over those patents and say, actually, we're no longer granting this patent to you. We're getting rid of it. We're repossessing this as a right to the public who funded this research, and we are manufacturing this drug, or we're making you sell this drug at a price that is extremely reasonable. We have the power to do that, and we should take that power to do that. Because what we're doing now is at the expense of our lives, is at the expense of the people that our government is supposed to be representing. If anybody's going to get exclusivity, it needs to be the people that live in this country and the people that need that medication outside of this country, especially, honestly, even. But we don't do that. We grant that exclusivity to corporations, to a small amount of people that's really going to benefit from profits. Meanwhile, we're suffering.
So let's talk solutions in the time we have left, Clifton. So you mentioned a couple of them, and there are a couple that I've certainly been for. One is we don't have to give them these patents. We don't have to give them these exclusive rights. They haven't handled them responsibly. They haven't taken good care of the American people with them, or any people. I mean, good health shouldn't be restricted by nationality, for that matter. And that certainly the kinds of population your group serves, people who might be HIV positive, people who might be homeless, people who might be incarcerated, lower income people. These are groups that have especially suffered at the hands of big pharma. What about just saying, no, you don't have exclusive rights to that anymore? We'll let the government go out and contract for someone that can manufacture them at cost or just above cost. We'll let the government produce these drugs. We'll let the U.S. military, it's in some cases, it's a humanitarian emergency. Let the military go in and produce and distribute them. What about really thinking boldly about how to stop the loss of lives and the daily continued suffering that's happening because of this broken big pharma system?
Yeah, that's exactly what we need to do. That's the power we possess and that we need to leverage. Unfortunately, that takes political will, and in our current climate, and honestly in every climate this country has ever existed in, we can't afford to elect anybody unless they are prioritizing the health and well-being of us, the people that is electing them. Everybody. It doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, it doesn't matter what race you are, what background you have. You will, at some point in your life, need access to healthcare. You will need access to pharmaceuticals, and you will need to be able to afford those pharmaceuticals. And a really great example about this in New York State, for example, is that hepatitis C. Hepatitis C is an epidemic that's killing more people than any other infectious disease combined across the nation. And people don't even know about it. It can live in your body for up to 30 years, and you have no clue. And then out of nowhere, you could really start to begin to see the signs and suffer. And by the time you have you get wind of it, you might be at risk of dying, or your liver may have damaged to a point of irreversible damage, right? And so there is a cure, though. There is a cure to hepatitis C, not a vaccine, but a cure. And the thing that's really just mind-blowing around this cure is that it's inaccessible. It is extremely expensive. At the peak of its price, at the retail price, the manufacturer that had it at the time, or one of the cures, because there's several versions of it, but Gilead, for example, at the peak charged about $1,000 per pill. And so if we're talking about anywhere from an 8 to 12-week regimen, that's 90 pills. And so we're talking anywhere from $84,000 to $90,000, right? At a retail price. That's insane. That nobody can afford to pay that. I mean, rich people probably can, but nobody else in our nation can afford to pay that price for an epidemic that's inevitable, that will kill them, right? And so never in our nation's history have we had a cure to an epidemic, not just an illness, but to an epidemic, and then refused access to it. That we have forced states to ration access to it. That we put up barriers, unnecessary barriers, but necessary in the sense that our states would go bankrupt, unnecessary in the sense that people are dying. And so it's only necessary that we prioritize their health. But these states have put up barriers. New York State was one of them. They had to put up barriers to ration that treatment and say, actually, if you don't have this insurance, or if your liver isn't at this level of damage, or if you haven't adhered to drugs in the past, blah, 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 you don't have access to this life-saving medication. And the reality is, the people that are on the margins of the margins are the people that are dying. Those are the people that don't that healthcare isn't easily accessible to them. So not only is it difficult to get them engaged in healthcare, but then it's difficult to give them the cure that will keep them alive, right? And so that price has gone down since then, but it really set a precedent for how far a pharmaceutical corporation can and legally will go to prioritize profits. And I could tell you that Gilead's profits multiplied in a very short amount of time on that medication alone. And many people would say, if we were to commandeer treatments, if we were to say, hey, we have an epidemic and we're going to cure everybody instead of offering exclusivity to these pharmaceutical corporations, they would say, well, you're going to interrupt innovation. They're going to say these pharmaceutical corporations take that profit, invest in research and development. But we know that's not true. We know that it's our public university system that's really doing that research. We know that when Gilead, for example, got all of that profit around those hepatitis C medications, they invested less in research and development than any of their competitors did that year, less even below the standard, right? And they experienced the highest profit margin based on that medication. And so we can't listen to that argument that innovation won't happen. That's another issue with NAFTA, honestly, is that one of the extensions that it makes is that even with a minor tweak and innovation to a drug, your patent can be extended. Your exclusivity would be extended. So we're not talking about really life-saving innovations. We're talking about not just the medication in terms of its shifting. We're talking about taking it from one form to a capsule. Right? It's not innovation.
Right. A different filler or what have, or a different use for the same substance, or yeah. No, absolutely. We've seen all that. I wish we had more time to talk about it, but I think Clifton, you made two fantastic points. One, that we've got a whole healthcare system that kind of gets built around this profit motive and greed of, among other agencies or forces involved, big pharma. And two is that if a political leader doesn't put the health of the people first, then they might not be worth our support. So unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But Clifton Garmon, Chief of Staff at Vocal New York, where can people go to find out more about your organization?
Oh, they can just go to vocal-ny.org. We're based here in New York State, and we're statewide. And this is obviously a national and global issue that we all should care about. And so, yeah, if my information's there, we're full of really great community organizers, campaign coordinators, and all of our staff and membership and leadership in the community that we serve and represent. We're a powerful, small but mighty group that want to prioritize these issues for everybody like us.
Well, we're all about small but mighty around here. So Clifton Garmon, thanks so much for your great work, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.